Alison, I was just actually coming across town there. I was across town here in Dublin earlier today, and I was crossing O'Connell Street, and there was this kind of group of protesters with banners, and I thought, oh God, what's this now? I turned around, they were all sort of elderly ladies, and they had across it, Grannies Against Racism, and I thought, fantastic. So this is this kind of counter effect that's coming to the streets now. I saw there's been a bit of it in the UK. I'm not sure I read whether there's much of it yet in Belfast, but it's sort of groups of people who are protesting against these protesters that have set Belfast ablaze.
Yeah, I mean, we do have counter-protests planned here. And on Saturday, when all of this kicked off, there was actually a counter-protest planned to coincide with the whatever we're calling them. You know, they're calling them anti-immigration rallies. Are they really? They're sort of race hate rallies. I don't know what else we could call them. So what happened was, obviously we had that shocking situation in Southport and the death of those three children, which I still can't even read about. It so upsets me because, you know, we'll talk about Grannies Against Racism. Those children are the age of my granddaughter, who is also Taylor Swift crazy. And every time I look at the wee faces, I think of her. But after that, we could see that things were kicking off in the UK, across the UK, mainly due at that stage to social media misinformation. So you had counts, some of them with, and we can maybe talk about some of those people, some of them who have tens and hundreds of thousands of followers, saying that the person responsible was had came in a small boat a year ago, he was on the MI5 watch list, he was an Islamic terrorist who had previous convictions, all of which were not true. We now know that the suspect in this case was 17, now 18. I think he turned 18 this week. Year old guy who was born in Cardiff to Rwandan parents who were had came to England after the Rwandan genocide. And anyone who knows anything about Rwanda will know it is a Christian country, a predominantly Christian country. So all of that was wrong. But, you know, say the lie is around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. So that is what happened. And it kicked off all those protests outside mosques. I was looking at those protests thinking, wonder will that hit us? Because we do have a growing, I suppose, far-right element who have been agitating on social media. And as sure as night's day, the next thing I started getting WhatsApp messages and screen grabs of Facebook pages and protests and all sorts of other things saying that there was going to be protests organised. It's these Protect Our Children, they're calling them protests. We'll get to that in a minute as well. But so police were asked about this on Thursday at the policing board meeting. Chief Constable said, yes, we're aware of it with a policing plan in place. Then the protest happened on Saturday. You know, we could see people who we would know from those sort of loyalist paramilitary circles. On the opposite side of the road, we had, you know, politicians, trade unionists, people from, you know, sort of refugees are welcome type groups, and police in the middle. There was a bit of shouting and bawling and back and forward across between them, some eggs and stuff thrown, but nothing that you would really get overly worried about in a situation like this. And then the very unusual scene happened is that we had the Coolock Says No squad showed up, you know, draped in tricolours, standing arm in arm with the loyalist protesters. And when that protest ended, so about 40 or 15 minutes, they realised they weren't going to get at each other. And they started moving, we believe, towards the Islamic Centre, which is close to Queen's University. Police were aware of this and stopped them. And once they stopped them, they sort of scattered all around the Holy Land's Lower Ormo area and attacked businesses, I suppose, that they perceived to be foreign owned. There was one bizarre point when they got lost around Rugby Avenue in the Holy Land because they were being led by a guy with a very strong Dublin accent who had a tricolour. He was marching at the front in a very deliberate way, looking at his Google Maps, but took them all the wrong way. So in a strange situation where these Belfast loyalists were following some bloke from Dublin with a tricolour to try and get themselves to an Islamic centre. Our photographer was talking to a police officer who said that obviously they're watching them, the drones up in helicopters. At one point they stopped outside a small mosque that a lot of people wouldn't really know existed, and they were all looking at their phones trying to work out how to get to the larger Islamic centre, but they didn't know they were actually standing outside one at the time. Right. Then they all move off, they start attacking businesses. There was a supermarket owned by a Syrian refugee who has had a terrible time. He's been attacked like 3 times since he owned that shop. I think some cafe was attacked. Other businesses were attacked, cars were set on fire, and then there was massive, you know, mass rioting on the Sandy Row, which is the loyalist area of Belfast that night. There was 2 plastic baton rounds fired, which is the first time that's happened in quite a few years.
So much going on there. A lot of chaos and a lot of confusion from those involved, for sure. first question I have for you is, why have the Loyalists decided to own this cause? What's that got to do with them, or am I not understanding?
Yeah, it's never been, I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say that it's predominantly Loyalist, because there has been someone from the nationalist community who has been charged. But the riots have all took place in East Belfast, the Woodville, and the Woodville area, sort of northwest Belfast, and Shandy Row, which is predominantly Shankill. So yes, they seem to be centred around mainly Loyalist areas. And there is a history between loyalism and the far right going back many, many years. If you go way back to the sort of Combat 18 time, the National Front, long before the EDL existed, people like Johnny Durr would have had very close links for Combat 18 and the National Front. And you had like loyalist skinheads who would have been, who you would have seen marching alongside in those National Front protests that we would have seen maybe in the 80s and 90s. That progressed on, where there has always been that sort of links between aspects, not all aspects of loyalism and some of those far right groups. And one of the people who was at Saturday's protest, a guy called Glenn Kane, who's a sectarian killer, he has known very, very close links to groups like Combat 18 in the past. So yeah, those are established links that already existed. We expect that, and we've seen that time and time again. But what you don't expect then is the so-called Irish patriots to come up and align themselves with this group of loyalists. Now, at those protests on Saturday, have to be clear, there were other protests in other parts of Northern Ireland where people maybe caused some traffic chaos by blocking roads for a short time, but perfectly peaceful. Protests that had like women and children and stuff at them. But the Belfast protest had people, especially at the front, who seemed intent on causing trouble, and people who may have showed up to protest. I think when they seen what was happening, most of them left, and left it that we had this sort of hardcore rump of people who were intent on causing trouble, and that's exactly what happened.
And in the aftermath of it, of course, back in Dublin, at Garda headquarters, there was another protest, and the Coolock Says No people with the flags were sort of ushered away by the protesters because they are now seen as being a bit toxic, because of course there was photographs of them with some of these loyalist types up in the north, and in a pub in particular where they were seen drinking in a pub. Look, we certainly have been able to identify certain figures that would be active down here, and they've certainly got links to criminality. One in particular, whose father was a very well-known gangland criminal called Cotton Eye Joe Delaney. His own name was Scott Delaney. He has a conviction. He has been involved in organised crime himself, self-professed for a long time. He's changed his name to Scott Knight, and he is very active in this sort of far-right element. And others we have identified, there has been stories about some of them with criminal backgrounds that we haven't properly confirmed, some of whom are believed to have been up in Belfast. But, you know, as time goes on, we'll be able to untangle their criminal backgrounds. But these people are criminals who would be involved in whatever sort of agitation they could. They have totally latched on to this cause. They're obviously travelling around to wherever they believe they can be of use. And they're actually making the protests and what legitimate protesting there is, they're making it very toxic.
Well, I mean, nobody wants, I mean, I don't think anyone, there are people who say, look, there are concerns in relation to housing and infrastructure. And also what we've heard is, and where the people who bear the brunt of all of those housing issues are people who are already maybe struggling, places where there's economic deprivation, there's no school places. These are all problems of government, though. They're not the problem of the poor person, you know, trying to make a home here. And then we've also seen attacks on health workers, and health workers saying that they're leaving, they're going to go somewhere else. And our health service is state as it is, without, you know, the people who are very important. My friend is a bus driver, and he said he picked up a young girl on her way to work yesterday, and she was shaking so much she could barely pay to get on the bus. And he had said to her, "She's okay," and she told him she was really frightened. She was from Syria, and she was going to work a very early morning shift as a healthcare worker. And, you know, these people are terrified and will leave, and then will, you know, whereas you're making up the deficit in the workforce, because it's certainly not what the people stand, you know, waving the flag protesting. But I mean, what annoyed me about it, well, first of all, that they have found me, the Patriots have found me on social media, and my God, I only thought I'd been trolled before. I realised this is next level trolling. Right. People saying, "Oh, when they rape and the Muslims rape and murder your daughters, you'll know all about it." And one says, "I hope when you're violated Muslim, you don't think you can report it to the police because you've asked for it, you've done on yourself. And oh my God, some of the things. We were actually sending a group chat. I remember a couple of girls. The 45 different ways I've been called fat in the past 3 days. It's if they think that that's going to make me run away crying or something like a child. It's insane the amount of abuse that we've been getting, misogynist abuse. And these are the people who are telling us that they're going to protect us all. We're protesting to protect women and children. The only person I'm in danger from is those people. They're like walking red flags, every one of them.
Is the trolling coming from bot accounts, or is there anybody who's actually using their own name and their own identity?
They don't use their own name. They're all fucking cardly shites. Like, they're all hiding behind fake accounts. One of the only thing that I suppose that bothered me was, especially, I suppose those Coolock ones think they could go down south and try and, patter this line off to people, and maybe people in Dublin who weren't aware of our situation might believe it, is that, oh, this was unity. We're coming together in unity, and they don't like it. The mainstream media don't like it. Look, we're orange and green united in a common cause. Like, literally go take yourself for a freaking, The thing about it is, people here have united for decades. We have a peace process because people from orange and green came together. Loyalist and IRA ex-prisoners were part of that negotiating team that negotiated the Good Friday Agreement. We have women's groups who have worked together from during the Troubles, not even after them, for decades together. The Falls and Shankle Women's Centre work together really, really closely for common cause, which, as you know, is to make sure that women and children are properly looked for and catered for, often in difficult circumstances. We have youth groups that work together across border. Every one of us almost, we live and we work and we socialise together. This is not a place where orange and green never speak to each other. We do still have problems in interface areas, but in the main, most people just live, work and socialise together. Young people don't care about things like that. This is not, they haven't reinvented the wheel by getting together. The only thing this is, which is something you and I know a lot about, is criminals with a common cause do not give a fucking toss where another person comes from or what their political beliefs or background is. They will join together, and the only thing uniting these people is hatred for someone whose skin is a different colour. That's the only thing joining them. That's the only united cause. And the Irish Patriots telling me that their mates in Sandy Row are now going to help them promote the United Ireland, and we're all going to be united in that, because if the UDA are involved in the United Ireland campaign, now that would be a story. I'll definitely get a headline out of that. But I'm pretty sure that's not the case. They're just united in hatred, united in, they come up here to wreck the place, and that even their own buddies in the far right want nothing to do with them now shows what a monumental error of judgment that might have been. They then went to a Loyalist bar drinking, hosted by someone who was arrested and questioned, and then later named in an ombudsman report which found collusive behaviours between the RUC and a UDA gang who were responsible for numerous murders, including the shooting of 5 people in the Sean Graham Bookmakers in the Lower Ormer Road in 1992. This was when the UDA went into what they knew was a business in a predominantly Catholic area of Belfast, so likely the patrons in that business would be Catholics, with automatic weapons, open fire, either killing or injuring everybody inside. The youngest just 15, the eldest 66. The memories of that go deep in that community, and that community is very diverse now. It's, there's a lot of people from minority backgrounds live there, but also very sort of proud Lower Ormo community. They come out and stood across the road to stop these headers who were rampaging through the streets. Some wrapped in Union flags, some wrapped in tricolours. One of them is videoed holding his hand up, holding his 5 fingers, mocking the people of the Lower Ormer Road about the murder of 5 of their friends and neighbours, while standing alongside the Irish Patriots from Coolock. I mean, get your head around that. It makes zero sense.
Throw something else out that they're united in, and it's been said to me a number of times, and it is a theory that is certainly not far-fetched, that these far-right agitators and, the Irish Patriots and, the Loyalists that took to the streets there, and the burning of properties and all that, there is certainly a sense that there's a certain amount of people that are being funded largely by organised crime, because the amount of resources that are being sucked up to police this, and that will have to be sucked up to police this in the future. Every time there's a protest organised, it is up to the police to make sure arson attacks don't happen, that people aren't injured, and that they do control these sort of riotous crowds. Because it becomes a very political thing. It's a very visible thing, and the communities want this policed. I mean, we can identify a certain few within those crowds who probably, if they weren't there, there wouldn't be quite as heightened tensions. But it does suck the resources from the state and from the police. And that means that when they're looking one particular direction, organised crime can work away in another.
Well, I do not believe for one second that the people who travelled up from Dublin to meet with the Loyalist paramilitaries, that this was their first meeting, that they all introduced each other on Saturday afternoon. They had clearly been in touch for quite some time. They were friends. You could see that they were friendly with each other. They knew each other. This is something that's been going on for quite some time. Are those conversations only about migrants and attacking people from migrant communities, or is there also other criminality going on there in the background? I know that some police officers believe that to be the case. Also, in terms of the businesses that were attacked, there are businesses along that road that were in that area that were completely left alone, despite the fact that they're clearly owned by people who would maybe have come from a Muslim community or a minority background. And that is because those businesses pay protection money to the UDA, and therefore they were untouched. And that's just a common fact. I mean, I don't care. People can go on and say to me, that's not the case, but it is 100% true. They walk past one business to burn another. Because some of the businesses, they have intimidated into paying weekly protection money, and other ones refuse to pay it. And anyone who isn't paying ball, well, their business is going up in smoke, and that was just it. And some of and we know a lot of this is orchestrated and inflamed online through misinformation, and a lot of those sites and some of those Facebook pages, people were saying, what on earth are you doing? We're just burning our own community, directing our own community. And the comments underneath it was, no, we're not. They're not our cars. They're not our businesses. They're theirs. And one of them, they claimed that one of them was collecting money, charity for an Islamic centre or a mosque. So he brought it on himself. Money's always at the root of all of these things, So protection money is saving some of the business. It's not saving some of the other ones. And, these people, I think it's an unholy alliance. It's one that, in general, they've also found a common cause in trolling me. So that's nice for them as well, as well as drinking in Loyalist bars and hanging around together and wrapping flags around each other and pretending to be best mates. They've also decided that they'll take a good stab at trolling the life out of me. Not that any of that will work, for God's sake.
No, you just ignore that, as we have to ignore.
Some of the actual frigging threats and things that we have been through, like a bunch of grey tracksuit wearing freaking morons, like, are hardly going to freaking frighten me.
Sometimes the morons, though, are a little bit more, risky than some of the more sort of a sensible.
You wouldn't want to be in their company, but they're not people whose company I would want to be in anyway, because the carry on is disgraceful. They're starting saying that they're here to protect women and children by screaming that they hope you're raped by Muslims. There's people among them who I know have convictions for domestic abuse, for sexual abuse, and all sorts of other crimes against women, and they're standing there claiming that they're the protectors of us. So, they're not people whose company you never want to find yourself in anyway.
What is the policing plan going forward? Is there pressure being put on the PSNI for this not to happen again and for controls to be put in place?
So police were criticised in terms of the policing response because there was so many businesses were attacked, and they knew this was going to happen from earlier in the week. They have kicked back against those criticisms and said that this was a very robust police operation, but that it was a very dynamic and changing situation. Basically, when they stopped them getting to the Islamic centre, they had no way of knowing that they would separate into 3 or 4 different groups and all run in different directions and start causing damage. Now, police here are woefully under-resourced, and they have a real shortage in numbers in terms of officers. I think there's at around 6,300 PSNI officers currently. There should be 7,500 at a minimum. And also we have around 1,000 at any one time off sick. So you can see that they're really working with depleted numbers. And so as a result of that, and fears that this violence is going to last well into next week, the Chief Constable has taken the unusual step of asking Police Scotland for what we call mutual assistance officers, mutual aid officers. He can't ask any of the forces or constabularies in England or Wales because obviously they have their own tensions ongoing at the minute, and there's sporadic riot that's popping up in a lot of those English cities. There hasn't been any similar situation in Scotland. So Scotland, he is hoping to be able to get officers from there. That hasn't been fully agreed yet, and there's even the budget. I don't know the budget's coming to pay for this, but we probably will within the next day or two have Police Scotland officers patrolling the streets of Belfast alongside the PSNI. And mutual assistance officers is unusual, but the last time that we had mutual assistance officers here in any numbers was in 2013, and that was during some of the worst and most intensive summer riots that we used to have. Riots that would have gone on for days on end. That was the last time that a chief constable asked for mutual aid like this. So that gives you an indication of just how serious the situation is.
You'd like to think that the North could police this.
In terms, I was been watching how the English police are dealing with it, and in terms of policing riots, well, my God, the PSNI should know how to do that. Let's face it. This is something that they've been doing for decades. They're trained. They have the TSG officers. They have the special unit of officers who deal with riots. So they should know. The water cannon was on loan to the guards, so it had to be returned.
I saw that.
That water cannon does more backing and forward across that border than you probably do, Nicola. Every time I talk about it, it's back and forward, back and forward. Anyway, so the water cannon is back in Northern Ireland and is ready for use. We were told that this morning. It's ready to go. There is, I think, something like 20 units of PSNI officers. There's about 30 in every unit, probably not, that are going to be on patrol over the weekend. All their leave has been cancelled. They've all been told to do overtime. There's a full pelt policing operation. And remember, all of that takes place while ordinary policing, like crime doesn't stop.
No.
Domestic abuse calls don't stop. Everything keeps on going. So you need officers to deal with all that as well. And one of probably the most disturbing thing, and we know that there was a Romanian man who was attacked just simply. I mean, we're told in some cases this is, fight against Islam and, mosques and everything coming to our cities, and then they just attack anyone who has, a tricolored skin. There was a Romanian man who was beaten in Sandy Row. He was protected actually by some people from Sandy Row who came out and protected him, or else the assault would have been much worse. But what I did hear today, which is probably one of the things that will stick with me, is that the youngest report of a victim of this was a 5-year-old child who was in the street and was approached by a grown man, not a teenager, a grown man, who shouted, "Go fucking home," in the face of a 5-year-old child. Now, what in the name of God way would you be thinking that you would think that that's acceptable way to behave?
Well, thankfully, most of us don't understand their thought process or their moral code. And, a greater number of us don't believe in the way they're behaving, a far greater number than the ones who are out there and who are agitating like this. And I do hope that it will be a similar policing plan for both our jurisdictions, that it'll be identifying the structure of this grouping, because it is essentially similar to an organised crime group. They're organising themselves into going out and protesting in this way. And then the constant policing that will be needed there to protect communities from the riot, but the underlying aspect of dismantling that criminal organisation, which will take longer, and be bringing these people before the courts, locking them up and breaking down those cell structures.
There's a number of things there. One is that I know, and I've asked police, and they have said that they have took all the video evidence that they have gathered from the protests and riots on Saturday, and that has been shared with their counterparts in Garda Síochána, because they want them to identify who these people are. And I've been told that if they have been identified as being involved in serious enough crimes, such as the arsons and the rioting that took place, that there will be a plan to extradite them across the border and prosecute them. And they've been assured that there will be full cooperation in doing that. And I would imagine that would take place vice versa if it was the other way around, and we see, these far-right elements from up here travelling to the south to any of those protests that take place, which I think has already happened. Someone sent me a video of a poster where they were talking to someone who was in Belfast who was joining them in a protest. And the other thing going forward is, as a society, how do we heal ourselves and how do we deal with these sort of issues? We're a changing community. Northern Ireland was a very white society. Nobody wanted to flee a war zone to come to a war zone, let's face it. That has changed since Brexit. And Loyalist, mainly unionism, voted in favour of Brexit. Nationalist areas mainly voted against it. But once Brexit happened, and we know then that the common travel changed, and people who were making up the shortfall in the workforce here, who were mainly Eastern European, went home. And because they had to go home, there was different visa arrangements after Brexit. And then what happened was the British government realised that they had massive holes in the workforce, both in agriculture and healthcare and everything else. And so they made more flexible visa arrangements. And that is how we have had people coming here to work from other places. The only difference between the Eastern European migrants who were here doing those jobs and the people now who've come to work in healthcare and all those other things is that they're easily identified because they're of a different colour. So, this racism, and that's what it is. It is racism. Mm-hmm. So people try and say, oh, it's about infrastructure and school places, and it's about doctors' appointments and housing. All of those are perfectly valid concerns you can raise with your government or your local politician. But they weren't a concern when the migrants were the same colour as them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're only a concern now.
Well, I suspect we're going to be talking about this a lot more over the coming weeks and months. Just before we finish, a little shout out to Coolock, because Coolock has been slightly hijacked by these people and taken north and all the rest of it. I think that it's fair to say that the absolute overwhelming majority of people living in Coolock are proud of their place and wouldn't be sort of behind this.
I have had messages from people from Coolock saying, born and bred, where I've lived all my life, they don't represent me, and they can take their banner and shove it, basically. So
I think so.
That every community, it's not monolithic. There's not, when we say loyalism involves this, we don't mean the entire Loyalist community.
Exactly.
Coolock, we don't mean the entire community of Coolock either.
Exactly. No, that's exactly it. And that's just to say that for anybody who's out there who's preparing a tome for me and you, on top of all the rest of the trolling we get. Yeah, we love you, Coolock. Anyway, right. Well, listen, I'll be in touch. We'll be talking very soon, I'm sure.
No problem.
Thanks a million. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.